Hi, I'm Charlene Collins Freeman. Welcome to my watercolor tutorial for creating extended two color charts. These types of color charts help you understand what mixes you can get out of any two colors in your palette. I'm excited to show you how I use these to better understand my watercolors. The supplies I'll use for this project include my Moleskine Art Watercolor Album. This is the biggest sketchbook I own. It's 11.75 inches by 16.5 inches. You'll need a 2H pencil and an eraser. I like to use a Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen Black brush to write in my text. I also use these drafting tool templates that you see pictured here. I use the square one. This template makes quick work out of making all the squares I want for my swatches. You could also use circles or triangles instead. You don't need these templates, but they sure make it quick. You'll want a nice round brush. I use my Black Gold 311 size 2. Some people prefer using flat brushes because they do paint swatches more quickly. Here's my pencil, my eraser, and my Faber-Castell Pitt pen. And here's my sketchbook. This is the first project I'll share with you. I created extended two color charts for 3 different triads of primary colors. A triad is essentially a grouping of any 3 colors, and I really enjoy creating triads of primaries. The first triad pictured here is my neutral triad, which includes yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and indigo. The cool triad includes Hansa yellow light, quinacridone rose, and phthalo blue green shade. And the last triad is the warm triad, which has New Gamboge, transparent pyrrole orange, and French ultramarine. If you study this extended two color chart here, and we'll start with the neutral triad, you'll notice that I started on the far left with yellow ochre. This is not mixed with anything, but as I progress through the chart, I add small increments of burnt sienna to it. Eventually, the swatch I'm painting has just burnt sienna, and I start adding small increments of indigo to it until I get to a swatch that is 100% indigo. And then I go back to adding small amounts of yellow ochre to that indigo until I get all the way back to yellow ochre. So this first chart of the neutral triad gives you a good idea of what mixes you can create from these 3 colors. Let me show you how I do this. I've already done the neutral triad, so let's jump into the cool triad, starting with Hansa yellow light. I've already drawn all the squares using my template, so all I'm doing at this point is painting. Once I get that first swatch in of pure Hansa yellow light, I will start adding quinacridone rose. I've decided I'm going to create 3 mixes between pure pigments. So I have my Hansa yellow light, and then I have 3 empty squares, and then I paint a swatch of quinacridone rose. Now I add just a touch of quinacridone rose to my Hansa yellow light. And that will go in the square that's right next to the just pure Hansa yellow light. As I work towards that swatch of quinacridone rose, I keep adding touches of quinacridone rose into my Hansa yellow light mix. These charts will definitely help you understand what mixes you can get out of any 2 colors. But also crucially, they'll help you understand how adding just a small amount of color to each puddle can shift the color pretty quickly. We want each one of these swatches to show a definite shift in color. So none of these swatches that are next to each other should look exactly the same. If they do, you're probably not mixing enough pigments to get that change. Each swatch should show us a noticeable difference as we work our way towards the next primary. Now that my Hansa Yellow Light is mixed with my quinacridone rose, I'm going to clean off my palette and work on the next two colors that I'll mix together. From quinacridone rose, I'll work towards my phthalo blue green shade. So I prepare a nice puddle of quinacridone rose on my palette and a nice puddle of phthalo blue green shade. Remember, I have 3 squares that I've allowed for mixing between the pure pigment swatches. So I paint in my pure pigment swatch of phthalo blue green shade. Rinse out my brush. Phthalo blue is a really strong color, so I want to be sure that I just pick up a little bit of it. You can see how much it already changed my puddle of quinacridone rose. Learning to add just small amounts to get small shifts in color is its own skill. If when you're mixing you find that you've had a huge leap, maybe you've gone from quinacridone rose to dark purple in one swatch, you'll want to go back and add more quinacridone rose to it, so that in the end your chart will have just small changes in color as we work from one primary to the next. This moleskin paper does buckle quite a bit, and as it buckles you can see how the paint accumulates in different corners of my swatches. So I try to paint that excess paint into the rest of the swatch. And now that I've painted my quinacridone rose to phthalo blue green shade swatches, I clean off my palette. And we'll finish this extended 2-color chart by creating the mixes that go between the phthalo blue green shade and Hansa Yellow Light. So on all of these charts, I start with the yellow and I end with the yellow. My phthalo blue green shade's already painted in, so now I add a swatch of pure Hansa Yellow Light. I darken up that first swatch I made, which is just pure Hansa Yellow Light. And now I have 3 swatches that I will use to mix various degrees of Hansa Yellow Light with phthalo blue. Again, phthalo blue is really strong, so I rinse off my brush before I dip it into my Hansa Yellow Light. And already with just a little bit of it in my brush, I can see a change in color. I add a little bit more. And a little bit more. Even at this point, comparing these 2 extended 2-color charts, you can see what a vast difference I've gotten in the color mixes between one set of primaries and the other. I'm done with my cool triad, so I clean off my palette and I'm ready to work on the warm triad. I'll speed up the video since it's the same process, but I wanted to show it to you as I work my way through. With the warm triad, the yellow is New Gamboge, so I start off with a swatch of pure New Gamboge. My warm red is transparent pyrrole orange, so I paint in my swatch of pure pyrrole orange. And now I'll add just a little bit of that to my New Gamboge. I'll need to add more transparent pyrrole orange to my puddle of New Gamboge for the next square, but you can see I'm running low on New Gamboge, so I go ahead and add more New Gamboge and more transparent pyrrole orange for the next swatch. And then for my last swatch, I add a lot more transparent pyrrole orange. Those two colors are mixed and I'm ready to work on the next set. From transparent pyrrole orange, I'll work my way towards French ultramarine blue. Clean off my palette and get the two puddles started. I create my puddle of transparent pyrrole orange and a puddle of French ultramarine blue. And I start by painting in that swatch of pure French ultramarine blue. Then I add a little bit of that to my first puddle of transparent pyrrole orange and paint that swatch in, working my way over. If I run out of paint, whether it's the first paint, transparent pyrrole orange, or the second paint, French ultramarine blue, just go ahead and dip back into that well if you're running out and recreate your puddles. And for the last section of this extended two color chart, I will extend French ultramarine blue over to New Gamboge. I paint in my swatch of pure New Gamboge and then touch a little bit of French ultramarine in for the next swatch. Slowly adding more and more French ultramarine blue as I work my way towards that pure pigment of French ultramarine blue. In addition to helping you understand your color mixes, I find that this exercise also helps you get a better grip on water to paint ratio. So here's the final page on the extended two color charts for my color temperature triads. I'd like to share with you some other pages from my color sketchbook. Here's an example of a different way of approaching your extended two color charts. On the page on the left, I have mixed Hansa Yellow Light with 5 other colors. The top row, I've mixed it with New Gamboge. The second row, Transparent Pyrrole Orange. The third row, Quinacridone Rose. The fourth row is French Ultramarine. And the last row is Phthalo Blue Green Shade. And you can see here I made 7 mixes between pure pigments. I did the same on the next page for New Gamboge, mixing it with Hansa Yellow Light, Transparent Pyrrole Orange, Quinacridone Rose, French Ultramarine, and Phthalo Blue Green Shade. Again, I've allowed for 7 mixes in between the 2 swatches of pure color. On these pages, I've done the same exercise for Transparent Pyrrole Orange and Quinacridone Rose. This starts to give you a good idea of what mixes you can get out of one particular color that's mixed with the others in your palette. And these pages show you the extended two color chart for French Ultramarine Blue and for Phthalo Blue Green Shade. I created similar extended two color charts for my Burnt Sienna and my Yellow Ochre and Indigo. And I just wanted to share these with you since they're just another approach to creating extended two color charts. Color issues usually stem from using too many colors or combining paints that don't really work well together. However, you can minimize both of these issues by learning to use compatible color triads. I want to introduce you to some common color triads and then give you another demonstration of how I do extended two color charts for these. The first palette is called the Delicate palette. It includes Hansa Yellow Light, Quinacridone Rose, and French Ultramarine. The next palette is called the Standard palette, and it includes New Gamboge, Cadmium Red Medium, and French Ultramarine. The Intensity palette consists of Hansa Yellow Light, Alizarin Crimson, and Phthalo Blue Green Shade. The Opaque palette includes Yellow Ochre, Burnt Sienna, Manganese Blue Hue, and the Old Masters palette includes Yellow Ochre, Burnt Sienna, and Indigo. And lastly, the Bright Earth palette includes quinacridone gold, transparent pyrrole orange, and indigo. These are the extended to color charts for these specific palettes, and I want to give you a quick demo on how I created them. Here the delicate palette is already painted in, so I'll start with the standard palette. I start off with New Gamboge, and paint my first swatch in of just pure New Gamboge. This time I've allowed for 4 swatches in between the pure primary colors. I pick up my primary red, which for the standard palette is cadmium red medium, and I paint that in on its own swatch unmixed. And now I need to fill in the 4 squares that bridge between New Gamboge and cadmium red medium. I rinse out my brush and put just a touch of that red into the yellow and start creating my extended 2 color chart. As I start running out of paint in my puddle, I don't just want to add water to that puddle. That will only dilute it, even though you may think you're making it go further. It's better to add more paint and not just water to these puddles. You don't want to go through the trouble of creating these extended 2 color charts only to find that you've painted them too watery and that as they have dried, they have faded. I continue to add small touches of cadmium red medium into my puddle of New Gamboge until I filled up all the 4 swatches in between the pure pigments. Once I have all the swatches painted in from yellow to red, I clean off my palette and start all over with fresh puddles going from my red to my blue. I found that if I don't do this, it's really easy to end up putting your brush into the wrong mix and really making a mess of the whole chart. So I prefer cleaning off after every 2 color mixes. In the standard palette, the blue is French ultramarine blue. So I paint in the swatch of just pure pigment at the end of the first row. And I start adding small increments of French ultramarine blue to my puddle of cadmium red medium and work my way towards that pure pigment of French ultramarine blue. Every time I rinse off my brush, it comes back fully loaded with water. I don't want to go straight into my puddles of paint. So what you don't see is that off camera, after I've put my brush into my water and rinsed it out, I also dry it out on my towel. I don't want to work with really watery puddles in my palette. Now I finished the colors going from red to blue, and I will need to create one last section of this extended 2 color chart going from blue to yellow. And for that, I created a short row right above the longer row for each one of these palettes. I paint in the pure New Gamboge and start with 2 new puddles of New Gamboge and French ultramarine blue. With 4 swatches in between each pure pigment instead of 3 swatches like we did earlier, I can see even more potential of the mixes I can get. I've sped up the rest of the demo as I work my way through all of these palettes to show you my creation of the extended 2-color charts. And here are the final extended 2 color charts for these particular palettes. Each chart gives you a clear idea of what color mixes and color harmony you could get out of each particular triad. I really encourage you to create extended 2 color charts for your colors. They will help you understand colors for the watercolorist, and they will also help you create paintings you're much more happy with. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and as always, thank you for joining me.